Spencer Schwellenbach had his elbow surgery. Hurston Waldrep is on Monday. Could we see these guys next season? Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today, your source for daily news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, award-winning baseball writer and podcaster. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball. You can find all my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. We're proudly part of the Believe Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app or go to fanduel.com to get started. The Braves signed Dom Smith to a minor league deal, brought him into camp. We'll talk about it, sure, okay. But before we do that, we got the news officially on Wednesday. Spencer Schwellenbach has had the elbow surgery. Let's talk about the operations. Let's talk about the recovery timeline. And let's talk about how Atlanta's schedule might work out in their favor. So here's what we know. Coming from Walt Weiss and from the Braves, Spencer Schwellenbach on Wednesday had a procedure to remove the bone spurs in his elbow. If you'll remember, he's already on the 60-day IL. He got placed on that last Monday when we found out about this. There's no official time frame from the Braves for Spencer Schwellenbach, right? This is something where typically what they do when they put out that tweet that we're kind of used to seeing at this point, he had the surgery, this is the time frame when he's expected to come back, whatever. We do not have an official time frame from the team. What we do know is other starting pitchers who had a surgery to take bone spurs out of their elbow, whether it's shaving them down, whatever, typically missed 3 to 4 months. And if you look at a 3 to 4 month absence from right now, you're looking to mid-June. If you assume it's 4 months, that is taking the long end of that time frame, but not accounting for any sort of delay in that. You have to remember, these guys, this happened to Schwellenbach, and we'll get to Waldrep in a second. This happened at the very beginning of spring training. And yes, these guys do a lot of off-season work, but you still use the 6 weeks of spring training to get ramped up for the season. Hitters typically talk about they need, 35 to 50 at-bats and they're good to go. Pitchers are usually a little bit more work, but you can shorten that down in some cases to 4 weeks or so and still get them ready for game action. So 4 months from now is mid-June. That feels like a reasonable expectation, barring some sort of medical setback, right? That gives him time to start throwing. That gives him time to actually, get back into playing shape and make his debut. Now, Hurston Waldrep, you might be in a little bit of a better situation. He is going on Monday to Dr. Keith Meister in Dallas. That's who does all of Atlanta's elbow surgeries. He is having loose bodies removed from the elbow. This is technically something different from the bone spur. A bone spur is attached to your bones. The loose bodies are typically fragments of bone or other things that have broken off from whatever structural piece they came from, and they're just kind of floating around in there, right? They're just in the elbow, kind of gumming up the works, right? So pitchers who have had loose bodies removed have a little bit of a shorter time frame usually than the full-on bone spur. Now, we don't know until the surgeon gets in there. Will they get in there to take these loose bodies out and decide, hey, we really should take care of this bone spur because that's what caused this problem and it's going to keep happening? We don't know, right? But as of now, The optimistic way of looking at this is that you could get these guys back some point in time in, mid-season. I'm not going to say the thing. Everybody's heard the thing, the Chip Carey thing about it's like making a mid-season trade or whatever. But there is still some hope from just a pure time frame of all of this perspective that Atlanta could get one or both of these guys back in the 2026 season. Shout out to Dr. Box, a legitimate, actual family medicine doctor in the Braves Today Discord. Kind of gave a little bit of information from the literature and things like that about bone spurs and loose bodies and things like that. The literature that's out there does reinforce the idea that you could potentially get these guys back. And he shared a lot of this with us about 4 to 6 weeks is kind of when you're beginning to be able to do throwing exercises, light tosses, things like that. And kind of towards the end of that 6 weeks is when you can actually implement some sort of structured throwing program to build up to full intensity throws. Then, it's the same progression as you would do a lot of guys who are working their way back from Tommy John. It's not as lengthy of a time frame, but the same progression where you would start off with just light tossing, you would increase the intensity, you would increase the distance, and then from there you would go halfway up the mound, and then you would go all the way up the mound, but still being tossing before you actually started pitching off of the mound. It's a whole progression, right? And the literature that he has about loose bodies in the elbow and things like that, that's the kind of time frame that you're looking at here. And so 6 to 8 weeks, you could see these guys throwing again. Again, not much. They're not going to be, letting it rip, but they could be throwing again. So that is the optimistic way of looking at this, right? The organization, Walt Weiss specifically, took a little bit of a more conservative tack, okay? When Weiss was asked by the media on Wednesday if those pitchers would still be available for the season, he said, quote, "I'm not sure. We all hope for that, but you never know how these things go." And I honestly think that's the right way to look at this. Because the last thing you want to do is assume you're going to get a Hurston Waldrep back, or assume you're going to get a Spencer Schwellenbach back, and then some sort of setback in the rehab, something happened. You're counting on them and you don't get them. I would rather assume you're not going to get them and be pleasantly surprised if you can add them June, July, the All-Star break, whatever it might be, right? That's the safest way to approach this, is assume you're not going to have them and maybe get them. And which, by the way, that's a similar boat you're in with Sean Murphy and Ha-Seong Kim, right? Not the not going to have them, but the assume a longer time frame. They're projected back in mid-May, even if it takes from May to June or something, right? The Braves' schedule coming up gives Atlanta a lot of kind of runway to figure this out. We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Fantrax. This is the absolute best fantasy baseball app on the market. There's a ton of different reasons why, if you play fantasy baseball, even if you want to do it for free and not pay for it, this is where you need to host your league. It's the deepest player pool in the world. They have a great notification system for your mobile device, so they ping your phone if you have a guy in your lineup who's not starting that day, if you left a pitcher out, if there's an injury. There's a ton of customization options for your commissioner. You can set how long guys have to resolve somebody who is or is not on the injured list, moving guys to the minors. Tons of options, customization, as simple or as complex as you want it. Go to Fantrax, it's with an X, Fantrax.com/Braves today to sign up for your free account today. Fantrax.com/Braves today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby. Let's talk a little bit about the schedule, because I don't really think that we've maybe looked at a lot of the factors that are going to go into this, right? Into this season. Everybody's kind of focused right now on the rotation, and I get it, right? 2 significant injuries from guys. One was going to be your number 2 starter. One was going to be one of your key contributors, your first guy up out of the minors this year. I get it. But I think, and I wrote a piece this morning over on bravestoday.com talking about how the projections, even after these injuries, for this rotation are pretty comparable to the 2023 rotation's actual performance. And that was something where the offense was so good in 2023 that even with that average at best rotation, you won 104 games. And how if you can get 85% of that offense this upcoming season, it makes perfect sense why this team could be an 85 or 90 win team. Like, a lot of the projections out there have Atlanta as one of the best records in baseball. They're not catching the Dodgers. Nobody's catching the Dodgers. But I think Fangraphs had Atlanta with the second best record in all of baseball. Because, yes, the rotation has taken a hit. But even as it's currently constructed, it's still good enough for an offense that's just hitting their projections, not even outperforming, just hitting their projections on the aggregate, everybody together, to still be a very, very good offense, or very, very good baseball team with a very good win-loss record. And something we haven't really dove into is I think the Braves' schedule really kind of helps the idea of, hey, all we have to do is kind of tread water early. We have a chance to keep our heads above water and then turn around, and now we can compete when we get some of these reinforcements midseason. Because if you remember last year, the worst thing that could have happened to the Braves was starting 0-7. Because when the season started, Atlanta had to go out west to the Padres and then to the Dodgers. And Atlanta looked like they were going to finally get off the skid. Shohei walked them off in Game 7 to start 0-7. And Atlanta just never really recovered. They were 5 games back after that first stretch of the season. After the first 7 games, they were 5 games back in the East. And they never got closer to the division than that 5 games back. I mean, they made it to 5 games back a couple times, right? They got to 5 games back the next week, April 10th. They got to 5 games back Saturday the 12th of April. They even got to 5 games back in May, but they never could close the gap because they started off in a giant hole. This year, on paper, it's a much more manageable schedule early. For the first time in seemingly forever, the Braves will be opening the season at home. They've got Kansas City for 3, which, very talented players. You're going to face Cole Reagan's a really good lefty in Game 1. They've got Bobby Witt Jr. They've got Michael Garcia, Ronald's cousin, who had a breakout year last year at third base. But not a playoff team. They were 2 games over 500. 1 game. They were 82-80. And if you look at their projected win-loss and everything, right? They should have been like 83-79, a little bit of bad luck, but they weren't a great team, despite having Bobby Witt Jr. You get them for 3, then you host the Athletics for 3. Yes, they're an exciting young position player group. Catching them for games 4, 5, and 6, you probably avoid some of their best pitchers who they use in the opening weekend. Lawrence Butler may not be available to start the season as he's recovering from off-season surgery. After that, you go out west. You do face Arizona for 4. Somebody needs to tell me why you play Arizona in your first 10 games like every single season. But You face Arizona for 4 on the road. Atlanta's typically done pretty well in that ballpark. Then you face the Angels in LA for 3, which, not a playoff team last year. They've got Mike Trout and a bunch of random guys. Cleveland, typically a pretty good team, not a very good offense, historically, not one that hits for a lot of power. After them, you've got Miami, who, pesky. They've been pesky at times. They're still not projected to be a playoff team. And then you do face Philly twice. You have some divisional stuff in the month of April. But sandwiched in that Philly series, you've got Washington for 4. And then when you get to May, yes, you got to face Seattle. Yes, you got to face the Dodgers. Yes, you have to face the Cubs. But you also get Colorado for 3. You also get Miami for 4. You get Washington for 3 more. You get Cincinnati for 3 in their ballpark, in Great American Small Park, where you can hit for a lot of power. The schedule doesn't really get tough until the month of June. And in June, no MLB schedule is easy. It's a balanced schedule. You face a lot of teams. You and everybody in your division, you play essentially the same schedule. But in the month of June, you open with last year's World Series rep from the AL in Toronto, who then spent a bunch of money this offseason. They brought in Dylan Cease, a bunch of other guys. Then you face Pittsburgh, who has had really good pitching and surprisingly invested a bunch of money in the offense this offseason. They grabbed Marcell Ozuna. They traded for Brandon Lowe. They added multiple pieces to that offense. Then you have to go to Chicago to face the White Sox in June. They've not been a good team, but you've somehow struggled against the White Sox in recent years. I don't really know what that's all about. Atlanta went 2-1 against the White Sox last year. The year before that, Spencer Strider had a snow game, snowed out there, and then got hurt soon after. After the White Sox, you go to New York to face the Mets. Then you're home for the Giants, who are improved. Then you face the Brewers, who had the best record in baseball last year. Then you go on the road to face the Padres. Then you face the Giants again. June is where the schedule really kind of ramps up in difficulty. And even kind of heading into the All-Star break, yes, you get St. Louis twice, but you also have to face the Mets again, and you have to face Pittsburgh again. I don't think Pittsburgh's going to be great, but I do think they're going to be better. So, the schedule early in the year is easier than what you've faced recently. I'll remind you, last year, in the first 2 weeks of the season, you faced the Padres for 4 on the road, the Dodgers for 3 on the road, you faced Philly, and you had Toronto. It was a murderer's row early, and Atlanta was just out of it. They were at one point, Atlanta was 5-13 last year. Early in the year. So being able to kind of backload the roster a little bit and get a lot of your tougher matchups in the middle and later part of the year should give you time to get Sean Murphy back. Should give you time to get Ha-Sung Kim back. May possibly give you time to get Spencer Schwellenbach or Hurston Waldrep back. We don't know, right? Schwellenbach, they've not given the time frame again. Waldrep has not officially had the surgery. Maybe they'll find more to do when they're in there. But if the surgery ends up being only what we've been told, that's an even faster recovery than Schwellenbach's surgery is. Maybe you'll have those guys back. The schedule kind of works out a little bit there. We'll see what happens. In just a minute, let's talk about the signing, right? You brought in Dom Smith to a minor league deal. You brought him to spring training. And it really leaves kind of a lot of questions about what is the plan for the final spot on the roster. We'll talk about that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby. Let's kind of talk about that last spot on the bench. I'm not doing a full roster preview here. We did write the article up. We wrote version 1.0 last week when pitchers and catchers reported. of a opening day roster prediction. Version 2 is going to drop on Saturday because that's when the games actually start. And there's been plenty of action, right? Jonah Heim signed between when we wrote that and now. Things like that. We had a couple pitcher injuries, so it's going to be different. But the whole roster projection will get dropped there. But I do want to talk about signing Dom Smith. Because if you had asked me what position are the Braves going to go out and find veteran insurance for, it wouldn't have been first base. Matt Olson, as we probably all know, has, knock on wood, not missed a game since he's joined the Atlanta Braves. He's been here, he was here 22, 23, 24, 25, not missed a game in that stretch, knock on wood, and his streak goes back to like May of 2021 when he just sat out a game kind of randomly. Then Oakland Athletics had him sit out of a game. I don't quite know exactly why that was, but since then he's not missed a single game. But there's a couple actual things that like Dom Smith could do for you if he gets that final spot on the roster. He does give you, again, first base insurance. He does have experience in the corner outfield. He's played both left and right. He's not going to be your go-to backup corner outfielder for anything, for anybody, right? But he has played a little bit of both left and right field in his career. I think the biggest thing for Dom Smith is if you look at what he's done in his career against lefties and righties. And on the splits thing, I'm really not a fan of just looking at one season of splits because so many statistics in baseball have a larger stabilization point than maybe we realize. And so, a guy may have in a single season, he may have performed well against lefties or righties or whatever, but guess what? It may not have been a statistically meaningful sample. Last year, Dom Smith had 179 at-bats against right-handed pitching. Well, guess what? The stabilization for walk rate is 170 batters faced or at-bats, right? Batting average, 630. So, what he produced last year, he produced a 296 against righties last year. It sounds great. You don't want to base your decision on that because batting average takes 630 at-bats to stabilize into a number that is statistically significant versus one that can be overly influenced by random noise. So if you look at his career versus righties and versus lefties, it's 1,743 at-bats against righties. It's less against lefties, but it's still a larger sample. He has an even 250 average against both. He's not been susceptible in his career to platoon issues. Now, again, last year, he was significantly worse against lefties than righties. He had it was almost 100 points different. But it was also, not even kidding, when you look at last year, it was 25 at-bats against lefties. You really can't look at that and say, oh, he's bad against lefties. It would make sense, being a left-handed hitter, that he would not be very good against lefties. But you can't look at that and say in any way that's statistically significant. In his career, he's neutral against both. But, from a batting average perspective, but he is an overall better hitter against righties. 100 WRC plus, a 90 versus lefties. And the thing to know about Dom Smith is he has had times in his career where he was a very, very good hitter. 2019 and 2020 together. Partial seasons for him because he came back from injury, I think, in 2019, and then 2020 was a shortened season. It was 400 plate appearances, 937 OPS. And again, you're still a little bit below the stabilization point of that. But he was able to, when he was healthy and on the field, be a very effective first baseman, and in this case, corner outfielder as well. He played some left field, he played some right field. The thing is, since then, he's dealt with a lot of injuries and he's not been fully healthy. But when he's gotten on the field and he's not been getting over a nagging issue or something like that, he's looked pretty good. 2025, 284 average, 750 OPS. Granted, smaller sample size, 220-something plate appearances, but he was reportedly fully healthy. I know I just talk out of two sides of my mouth there. I said on the one hand, you can't just automatically assume this small sample size is relevant. And then on the other side, I said, well, he did good last year in 225 plate appearances. I acknowledge that those two things are at odds. But the story of Dom Smith's career is that when he's been fully healthy and not dealing with nagging injuries, he's been an above average performer. 2019, 2020, 2025. He had a solid, if unspectacular, year in 2023. With Washington, he played almost a full season. Again, when he's been healthy, it adds up to just over a full season of at-bats. And he's been a very, very quality performer. High batting average, low strikeouts, a decent on base. And so taking a flyer on league minimum money on a minor league deal for a guy that could be a veteran for you is useful. Because it's been a lot of injuries, right? He had a tear in his shoulder labrum earlier in his career. 24, he had a broken hamate bone in his hand. He had a stress reaction in the hand. Like, he's had quite a few issues here. But the role that he could theoretically play for you is useful. You don't need him in the outfield, right? You've got Acuna, you've got Yastrzemski, you've got Harris, you've got Profar. And if you lose any one of those guys, Eli White can step in. You don't need him at first base. You've got Matt Olson. And honestly, if your outfield's healthy and, knock on wood, you do lose Matt Olson, Jurickson Profar's played first base. You've got backups there. But what you don't have is the ideal pinch hitting option off the bench. I think Jake talked about this on Locked On Braves a little bit earlier this week. But if you look at the Braves bench right now, the configuration of this bench for opening day, so not counting Sean Murphy, is Jonah Heim as your backup catcher. It's Eli White as your fourth outfielder, whatever you want to call him. It's Jorge Mateo as your backup shortstop and infielder. And between White and Mateo, those are probably also your pinch runners because they're incredibly fast. Both of them are among the fastest players in baseball. And that last spot's just kind of there. A lot of options for it. Kyle Farmer, the Atlanta native, he's in camp. They reacquired Brett Wisely, I want to say it was last week, in like a cash considerations deal. So you've got Brett Wisely, who could factor into there. Now you have Dom Smith. There's a couple other guys in camp. Aaron Schunk is in camp, former free agent out of Colorado. He's like a third baseman, second baseman, can stand at shortstop. You've got Luke Williams in camp. There's a couple options to fill that last spot on the bench. But none of those guys I mentioned, maybe outside of Dom Smith, are guys that you would want taking a pinch hit appearance for you. The thing about Atlanta's bench late last year, when you were playing when you had Baldwin and Murphy both, before Murphy got hurt, before he went down for surgery, you would have like Baldwin could be in at DH and Murphy's behind the plate. They had Leone on the bench to take care of that. But that meant Marcell Ozuna wasn't in the lineup. And so they could call on Marcell Ozuna if they needed a high-quality pinch hit at bat. They're not sending Luke Williams up there. They're sending Marcell Ozuna, a veteran hitter who has been very good in his career, up there to pinch hit. It's a veteran at bat. He was great at drawing walks last year, even if the power wasn't there. And so that's kind of a role that you don't have right now. Unless you run a lineup where Baldwin's behind the plate and Heim is not in the lineup at all, and you think Jonah Heim can recapture his former all-star form and can be a pinch hitter for you. But I could see where they say, hey, we're going to give Dom Smith, we're not trying to fill a defensive position. We're trying to fill a role, a job. And we want to see who can best handle this job. Maybe that's why Dom Smith is here. I don't know. This is probably a good compromise. You could really get wild and esoteric with that, who filled that job. Like, Justin Turner's out there. And yes, Justin Turner is incredibly old, and on the whole is not very good anymore. But he is a veteran. He's played like every non-shortstop infield position. He can still be a very good pinch hitter for you, and he could give you a professional at-bat. He's also not very good defensively anymore, and so you'd rather not play him in the field, or at least Dom Smith can stand there. So maybe that's the role for Dom Smith. I don't really know what the plan is here, but I do know that there's literally zero downside to bringing him into camp. Why not? Give him a look. It doesn't matter. Again, you've got 7 different guys that could all fill this role. And honestly, it might not even matter. I think it was 2024 where Forrest Wall made the opening day roster because he had a really strong spring training. And then after a month, they just DFA'd him and moved on. It might not even matter. This guy whoever this person is, might make the lineup and not see a game for a month unless they're pitching in a blowout. But why not? Bring a guy in, see if he's got anything in the tank. Let's try. It costs you almost nothing to do this. Let's give it a shot. A little bit more fun coming for you. Friday, we're going to talk a little bit more about the upcoming draft. Got a guest coming on to do that. And games start on Saturday, so we might just drop a bonus episode previewing kind of what, the roster outlook and the spring training schedule and all that stuff. In the meantime, do us a favor. Please like the video. Please subscribe both here and at bravestoday.com. Your free and paid memberships help us out a ton over there. And until next time, this has been Braves Today.